Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next installment of My Impact, which is a conversation series with our Equal Justice Works Fellows to learn more about the incredible work that they did as fellows and afterwards. My name is Brooke Meckler, and I am a program manager in the Law School Engagement and Advocacy Unit at Equal Justice Works. And I'm honored to be here today with Brook Hill, who was a 2016 Equal Justice Works Fellow, to talk about the work that he's done. So Brook, thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
And let's jump right in to get to know more about Brook and the work that he's done in public interest law. Starting with, what compelled you to pursue public service, and why did you pursue it through law school?
That's a good question. So when I was young, it almost sounds cliche, but my dad used to tell me, like, in order to be 100%, you're going to have to be 200% because you're Black. And he used to give me ominous warnings about the police, like they only want to see you dead or in jail. And it just felt incredibly unfair. And I also, saw, the struggles of, some family members and, people in my neighborhood and what I was also personally dealing with. And it just, built sort of a passion for, I guess what I like to say, the pursuit of freedom, justice, and equality. And it just sort of, it's like I've got this like drive. It's like 2 parts love and 1 part rage. And that is really what drove me to do social justice work. I was a community organizer for 5 or 6 years before I went to law school or before I became a lawyer. And during that time, I partnered with attorneys at like New York Lawyers for the Public Interest and Brooklyn Legal Aid on a couple of projects. One had to do with housing, another had to do with an environmental issue in the public schools. And I saw sort of the role that those attorneys were playing and felt like one day it would not be bad for me to play such a role. And that was really sort of the inspiration. So.
Well, that's great. And I think that being your inspiration, you now have probably become a lot of inspiration for young community organizers or, even young law students who might want to do the same type of work as you did. So in getting into your fellowship, you were an Equal Justice Works 2016 fellow at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. Can you tell us how you learned about the fellowship and why you decided to apply for that opportunity?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that at law school I talked to like the career services folks, early on about what I wanted to do when I graduated, and I was never particularly interested in working for a firm. I knew that I wanted to do social justice work and civil rights work in particular. And so I'm pretty sure that at some point the career services folks said, in order to do that, you'll probably need a fellowship from, one of these places, and Equal Justice Works, of course, would have been one of those places. And also in my, the second year, my second summer, the organization I worked for had folks come in and talk to us about different fellowship opportunities. I also, sorry, I was also a paralegal for my last 2 years of law school at the Lawyers Committee. And we had an Equal Justice Works fellow who was, in her fellowship at that time. And she sat basically just across the hall from me. So I learned a lot about Equal Justice Works from her too, but she wasn't the first source.
Well, great. And I think, a lot of law students who are thinking about pursuing fellowships might have a similar situation as you. Maybe they worked before law school or they had a prior relationship with an organization like that and realized it was the best place to sort of launch their career. So can you tell us about your fellowship and your work throughout those 2 years? Some of the lessons that you learned, what was most memorable, and just talk through your fellowship.
Sure. During my fellowship, I represented groups of tenants who were living in properties that were transitioning from some sort of affordable or subsidized arrangement to market rate, and which, essentially means, those folks were facing displacement in a lot of cases. I worked to, ensure that fair housing laws were complied with, and other, tenants' rights issues. And as far as, what I learned was that these cases can be a lot more complex than I appreciated. One of the first cases that we filed when I was a fellow, we had, I already worked at the Washington Lawyers Committee as a non-lawyer immediately before my fellowship, so we had sort of been eyeing this case, working it up, and we filed it very quickly after my fellowship started. And unfortunately, we lost that case. We just about a month ago, we got summary judgment for the defendant. So that case, when I say it was a lot more complex than I appreciated, we didn't even make it to trial, and here we are, 4 years and change or whatever later, and it sort of just wrapped up. And we would have probably filed more of these cases, but just the sort of, we would have needed more fellows or more lawyers, at least more bodies on the ground, and so that, yeah. And also collaboration over the long term, over those several years in a case like this, is incredibly difficult, and it's a lot higher touch than I appreciated, even after having been an organizer for several years, where all of the campaigns are high touch. I think that I didn't appreciate like sort of the level of cohesion you need to have to keep it together with 500 families over 4 years or 5 years. So yeah.
So more fellows is what we need too.
Absolutely, that's right.
So you're now associate counsel at your original host site. So can you talk about your transition, and I think you already have, in the fact that you've had a case go through from your fellowship to your, life after fellowship. Can you talk about that transition?
Yeah, so it was actually pretty seamless. I maybe had like a month or two during the early part of my second year as a fellow, where I was kind of trying to think about what would happen if I wasn't able to continue at the Lawyers Committee, like where might I end up? And but I didn't even have a chance to apply anywhere else because I got an offer in January. So I guess my fellowship ended in August, and I had an offer for September and January. So it was well in advance, and the transition was pretty seamless. I've continued to work in the Fair Housing Project at the Washington Lawyers Committee. I've been doing a wider variety of fair housing cases. Some of the cases have been similar-ish to what I did during my fellowship. Nothing directly on point, but I've had an opportunity to do a lot of exciting and fulfilling fair housing work. So yeah, it's been good.
Great. And now you can be on the other side where you're bringing on fellows to help you with your work.
Yeah, that's definitely our hope. The Lawyers Committee does have a fellow starting in the fall of this year. He's not going to do fair housing work with me. He's going to be doing police misconduct work. No surprise, very timely, right? But still excited to have another Equal Justice Works fellow in the house. So
yes, absolutely. So this was a good segue. We are living in a unique time for a number of different reasons right now. And while it's different for everyone, law students especially might be feeling some sort of pressure to make change and also feeling a little nervous about what the future might hold. So what advice would you give law students or recent graduates who are preparing to enter the public interest workforce?
Um, so that's a good question. Uh, ho- uh, Apply for Equal Justice Works fellowships. But I would, when you're drawing you're trying to create your project, I think that there are a lot of ways to tie projects that deal with a variety of different issues to sort of this moment. And because we do a lot of, at the Lawyers Committee, all of our cases, we have a big firm that co-counsels with us. So we're sort of like the subject matter experts, and they bring the the manpower and through their partners some of the like long-term procedural experience. But we have to sort of interact with the same attorneys and firms that sponsor Equal Justice Works fellows, and I can tell you that they are excited about cases that we can somehow tie to this this moment, whether it be the COVID-19 related issues, which are probably going to outlast the virus, especially as like the eviction crisis starts to mount. There's multiple different social justice employment type of issues, obviously police misconduct issues, and other sorts of prisoners' rights issues. So there's a myriad of different ways to tie social justice work to the moment, and I think that that is a good way to make your fellowship both interesting while you're on the ground doing it, and also exciting to sponsors.
Great advice. Well, it has been such a pleasure talking to you today. Are there any sort of last words of wisdom you want to share about your fellowship or the work that you're doing?
No, I think that the questions were pretty spot on. I really do appreciate the sort of Equal Justice Works community. We have other Equal Justice Works fellows that work in our office, and that I know here in DC, and it is a great way to bond with other new like-minded attorneys. That I don't think that I fully appreciated that when I first became a fellow, but it was like a pleasant thing to learn about. So
That's great. I'm glad that you feel like you're such a part of that community because we're glad to have you.
great.
Well, thank you again for taking some time today, and we hope to hear from you soon and see the the work that you keep doing with your organization. So thanks and good luck out there.
Okay, great. Thank you.